This presentation is about the restoration of a lantern clock made in Gallipoli in Italy in 1765. I purchased this clock from Bonham's Auctions in the USA. Normally, items sold by Bonham's attract very large prices, but I guess the dilapidated state of this clock meant that I was able to get it for quite a reasonable amount. It came from an estate in California, and you can read a little bit more about that at the bottom of this page. The clock dial was signed by Andreas Guarna of Italy in 1765, and since that time the clock had been subjected to quite a few modifications. For a start, the dial centre had been hacked out to expose the 666 snail. Why? Who knows? The anchor escapement had been put into the clock to replace the original crown and verge escapement. The bell spider was so low that there was no way that the hammer would ever contact it, and there was other atrocities throughout the movement. At least this clock had a name of the maker, Andreas Guarna. I was able then to do some research through some of the reference books on Italian clockmakers. And there he was, a native of Venice perhaps, but certainly living in Gallipoli in Lecce. He was recorded as having made clocks in Gallipoli and a table clock in 1777. When I read that he lived in Gallipoli, I didn't quite understand that, because being Australian, we link Gallipoli to Turkey. But when I look on the map of Italy, there is a Gallipoli right down the south. It's a very old town. It's out on an island, and it was built in the 3rd century BC. On the heel of Italy. This slide shows many of the atrocities that I found when I started to research the actual clock. The conversion from verge to anchor had resulted in a huge amount of the top plate being hacked away until there was almost no metal holding it together. First thing I did was to remove the anchor escapement and reinstate the verge escapement, which included the contract wheel and potence, crown wheel and pinion, pallet arbor and pallets, front and rear pallet cocks. I'd almost completed the installation of the verge escapement with the pallet arbor. I decided that the top plate was far too weak due to all the cutouts that had occurred in the past. The only answer was to make an entire new top plate, and that you can see on the right. Gradually I worked my way through both the time and strike trains, cleaning, repairing, polishing, cutting and polishing pivots, rebushing plates, until ultimately both time and strike trains were fully restored. Of interest is the 6-count rack. This clock has a 666 snail, which, if you might remember, is called alla romana, or Roman counting. So the rack has a very few teeth, because the most hook lever strike is 6. Another interesting feature of the clock movement was that it had a passing strike for the half hour and then the full hour strike as well. So it should have had 2 bells. I was able to reconstruct that with a double bell post and then find 2 bells that matched beautifully in the way that they stacked one on top of the other. The passing strike lever is actuated by a pin on the minute wheel, and that lever then passes up behind the dial and out around the hour bell to finally hit the head onto the top bell. This is the completed clock as far as mechanical components go. Both time and strike mechanisms are fully operational. The hands that were fitted to this clock when purchased were replacements and were totally wrong for an Italian lantern clock of this age. By referring to my books on Italian clocks, I found a pair of hands contemporary to mine and then fretted them out of some steel, fettled them, which gives them a 3D effect, and then blued them. The only reason that I could come up with for removing the centre of the dial was to display the 666 snail. Well, there's nothing moving, so it's not a very interesting view. The original dial certainly wouldn't have had that hole. I made a patch out of some old brass plate, cut out a disc, friction fit into the dial, and then soldered it into place. I then laid out a design consistent with the design remaining around the outside of the patch. The frets that were on the clock when purchased were of an English design and obviously replacements. So again, referring back to my books on Italian lantern clocks, I generated a fret that was Italian in design. This was cut out of brass plate, fretted, fettled and engraved, and then fitted. The finished restoration is shown here beside two other clocks from the same period. The design, the style is consistent for a double-belled Italian lantern clock of this period. Some of the characteristics of the clock now are the crown wheel with a horizontal verge, alla romana striking with 666 snail, two bells, one for the half hour and one for the hour striking, a single driving weight for time and strike, but it doesn't use the endless rope system of Huygens. And it's a very heavy drive because the clock actually runs for 8 days, which is very rare in a lantern clock. Italian lantern clocks require a bracket to be hung on the wall. When I make my brackets, I like to pick up a feature of the clock itself and incorporate that into the bracket. And here you can see at the top I have a trifoglio, which means 3 leaves, but it's representative of the 2 bells stacked one above the other. What a difference a month makes, from an abused mess to a beautiful Italian lantern clock. There's really nothing I need to say about this picture. The clock says it all. If you have any questions or comments that you'd like to make about this presentation, you can send them to me on an email as shown at the bottom of this page. Thanks for watching.